Hi, it's Knuckle. Last year, I wrote a reflection on my favorite novel, The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. I'll paste a link to that. Written in 1997, the novel explores the effects that seemingly small objects and events have on our lives and our experience of life. The writer John Berger said of the novel, "Never again will a story be told as if it's the only one." The novel won the Booker Prize for Fiction, and Roy quickly became a national symbol of India. Not for the novel she'd written, but for the prize that she'd won. Many expected of Roy that she would follow the footsteps of other successful Indians and immigrate to the United States or the UK. But she longed to return home after her 5 minutes of fame. Upon returning, though, it no longer felt like a home to her. India had been testing nuclear weapons, something which deeply concerned Roy. Her awareness of her own image as a national icon compelled her to speak out on the issue in this impassioned essay, full of humanity, sensitivity, and the great truths of life. It's titled The End of Imagination and has implications not only for how nations conduct themselves, but also for how we choose to view ourselves on an individual level with relation to the collective, and the things worth living and dying for. We'll read through almost the entire essay today. I should preface this by saying that the history and politics of South Asia is not a subject on which I'm any kind of expert at all, but I think this is an important essay for anyone living in the age of nuclear weaponry and grappling with these fundamental questions of the meaning of life and death. So it opens with a passage from an article from India Today, a magazine in India, and Roy is opening with this passage in order to illustrate the ethos around the nuclear program within the Indian government and media at the time. It opens with, "The desert shook. The government of India informed us, its people. The whole mountain turned white. The government of Pakistan replied. By afternoon, the wind had fallen silent over Pokhran. At 3:45 p.m., the timer detonated three devices. Around 200 to 300 meters deep in the earth, the heat generated was the equivalent to 1,000,000 degrees centigrade, as hot as temperatures on the sun. Instantly, rocks weighing around 1,000 tons, a mini mountain, underground, vaporized. Shock waves from the blast began to lift a mound of earth the size of a football field by several meters. One scientist on seeing it said, I can now believe stories of Lord Krishna lifting a hill." Okay, so let's begin the essay. May 1998, it'll go down in history books, provided, of course, we have history books to go down in. Provided, of course, we have a future. There's nothing new or original left to be said about nuclear weapons. There can be nothing more humiliating for a writer of fiction to have to do than restate a case that has, over the years, already been made by other people in other parts of the world, and made passionately, eloquently, and knowledgeably. I am prepared to grovel, to humiliate myself abjectly, because in the circumstances, silence would be indefensible. So those of you who are willing, let's pick up our parts, put on these discarded costumes, and speak our secondhand lines in the secondhand play. But let's not forget that the stakes we're playing for are huge. Our fatigue and our shame could mean the end of us, the end of our children, and of our children's children, of everything we love. We have to reach within ourselves and find the strength to think, to fight. And I love this paragraph because this is the role of the artist and the role of the activist. It is to pick up our secondhand parts and discarded costumes in this sad secondhand play. It's to say what's already been said before, what's already been known before by anyone who's had the sensitivity and the humanity to see it, and the resilience to not look away. It is to know the play is sad. It is to know it is a tragedy. To know in some sense how it's going to end. But also to fight with all our life and our aliveness because of what's at stake. Because to surrender to fatigue or shame would mean the end of us. Once again, we are pitifully behind the times, not just scientifically and technologically, ignore the hollow claims, but more pertinently in our ability to grasp the true nature of nuclear weapons. So she's asking readers to ignore the hollow claims from the Indian government that India is on a level playing field with the rest of the nuclear powers of the world, scientifically and technologically. But she's also pointing out that what's far more important than a mere scientific understanding of nuclear weapons is a moral understanding of them. A scientist can understand very well the science of nature of nuclear weapons and yet have no understanding of what a nuclear weapon really is, of what it really means to use a nuclear weapon for the world and for ourselves. And by ourselves, I mean humanity. Our comprehension of the horror department is hopelessly obsolete. Here we are, all of us in India and in Pakistan, discussing the finer points of politics and foreign policy, behaving for all the world as though our governments have just devised a newer, bigger bomb, a sort of immense hand grenade with which they will annihilate the enemy, each other, and protect us all from harm. I love this. Annihilate the enemy, and then in parentheses, each other. If you step outside for a moment and look at the big picture, not as an Indian or as a Pakistani, but as a human being, you see the irony of the whole situations. Two governments seeking to annihilate each other with nuclear weapons, and doing so in order to protect us from harm. So annihilate each other and protect us, but us is each other. The us is Indians and Pakistanis, but it's also all of us as humanity. So she's bringing out the irony and absurdity here. How desperately we want to believe that. What wonderful, willing, well behaved, gullible subjects we've turned out to be. The rest of humanity may not give us, but then the rest of humanity, depending on who fashions its views, may not know what a tired, dejected, heartbroken people we are. Perhaps it doesn't realize how urgently we need a miracle, how deeply we yearn for magic. So often, when people behave aggressively and even seemingly unforgivably, it's because deep down they're hurting, heartbroken, hopeless, and fatigued. And so, while the rest of the world may not be able to forgive India for creating something as destructive as a bomb, that might be because the rest of the world might not be able to perceive the tiredom, the dejection, the heartbreak that is omnipresent in Indian society. How urgently this people needs a miracle, how deeply they yearn for magic. But I would also posit that the use of we and us is important here. Yes, Roy is using these words as an Indian, but she's also using them as a human. I think it can be said that humanity in general urgently needs a miracle, that humanity deeply yearns for magic, and that the nuclear bomb, which is a human invention, not a distinctly Indian one, which is a point that Roy strenuously makes throughout this essay, is a reflection of humanity's urgent need for a miracle and deep yearning for magic. And I think it's also true on an individual level that each of us desperately needs a miracle, that we each deeply yearn for magic. And this often drives our pursuits for other things like money, fame, power, etc., that can't really bring us the deeper thing that we're looking for. If only nuclear war was just another kind of war. If only it was about the usual things nations, territories, gods, histories. If only those of us who dread it are worthless moral cowards who are not prepared to die in defense of our beliefs. If only nuclear war was the kind of war in which countries battle countries and men. But it isn't. If there is a nuclear war, our foes will not be China or America or even each other. Our foe will be the earth itself. Our cities and forests, our fields and villages will burn for days. Rivers will turn to poison, the air will become fire, the wind will spread the flames. When everything there is to burn has burned and the fires die, smoke will rise and shut out the sun. The earth will be enveloped in darkness. There will be no day, only interminable night. So, this is an important reminder because we as a human race have never experienced an all out nuclear war before. In our heads, we often imagine it as a war on steroids, but it's actually something totally different altogether. And the usual things, national identities, territoriality, religious differences, are rendered completely meaningless should an actual nuclear war break out. She even seems to be pointing out that one needn't be anti war to oppose nuclear war. Often people opposed to war are thought of as moral cowards who are not prepared to die in defense of their beliefs. But even if you accept that premise, nuclear war is a different beast altogether. It's not the kind of war in which countries battle countries and men. In a nuclear war, our foes are not other countries, but the Earth herself. The Earth is the symbol for life and for creation, and the bomb is the antithesis of that death and destruction. What shall we do then, those of us who are still alive, burned and blind and bald and ill, carrying the cancerous carcasses of our children in our arms? Where shall we go? What shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we breathe? I really like that she says, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we breathe? Because we often use these as intransitive verbs. I eat, I drink, I breathe. We forget we don't just eat. We eat something, food. We don't just drink. We drink something, water. We don't just breathe. We breathe something, air. And we take for granted that these things are infinite and forever, because in a way they are. But through our monstrous inventions, we as a human race have created something so destructive, as to even threaten the infinity of Mother Nature, the infinity of divine creation. The head of Health, Environment, and Safety Group of the Bhabha Atomic Research Center in Bombay has a plan. He has declared that India could survive a nuclear war. His advice is that in the event of a nuclear war, we take the same safety measures as the ones that scientists have recommended in the event of accidents at nuclear plants. Take iodine pills, he suggests, and other steps such as remaining indoors, consuming only stored water and food, and avoiding milk. Infants should be given powdered milk. People in the danger zone should immediately go to the ground floor and, if possible, to the basement. What do you think of these levels of lunacy? What do you do if you're trapped in an asylum and the doctors are all dangerously deranged? So, this thing that's supposed to protect us is actually threatening to drive us into apocalypse. And I really like this last part. What do you do with these levels of lunacy? What do you do if you're trapped in an asylum and the doctors are all dangerously deranged? I like this because it's flipping on its head the claim that those who oppose nuclear weapons testing are all paranoid and deranged, which is what she's about to get to next. Ignore it. It's just a novelist's naivete, they'll tell you. Doomsday prophet hyperbole. It'll never come to that. There will be no war. Nuclear weapons are about peace, not war. Deterrence is a buzzword of the people who like to think of themselves as hawks. Nice birds, those. Cool, stylish, predatory. Pity there won't be many of them around after the war. Extinction is a word we must try to get used to. This is interesting because the word extinction is typically used for birds and other creatures, but might now be applicable for the human race. I researched deterrence, and it's basically the theory of using the threat of a nuclear bomb to discourage adversaries from wrong-footing you, because now you have this nuclear bomb in your back pocket, and no one wants to mess with the nuclear power, or so we think. Deterrence is an old thesis that has been resurrected and is being recycled with added local flavor. Again, she's referring to the fact that India is inheriting this place secondhand, and the Indian government is now adding a twist of local flavor to make the bomb feel like something central to Indian identity. And that theme dominates much of this essay, how the Indian government tried to conflate support for the bomb with Indian nationalism, and how opposition to the bomb was framed by the government and media as making one anti-Indian. And this has also been true in many other parts of the world, where nuclear bombs have been developed and tested. Of course, Roy is arguing that the bomb itself is actually anti-human entirely. The theory of deterrence cornered the credit for having prevented the Cold War from turning into a third Cold War. The only immutable fact about a third Cold War is if there's going to be one, it will be fought after the Second World War. In other words, there's no fixed schedule. That's what makes this essay chillingly relevant today, as when it was written nearly 3 decades ago. The theory of deterrence has some fundamental flaws. Flaw number one is that it presumes a complete, sophisticated understanding of the psychology of your enemy. It assumes that what deters you, the fear of annihilation, will deter them. What about those who are not deterred by that? The suicide bomber psyche, the we'll take you with us school. Is that an outlandish thought? How did Rajiv Gandhi die? So I also researched this. Rajiv Gandhi was a prime minister of India who was assassinated by a member of a Tamil militant organization. Tamils are an ethnic group that exists both in India and Sri Lanka, and in Sri Lanka, Tamils were experiencing persecution. And Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was seen by this Tamil militant organization as not doing enough to advocate for and protect the rights of Tamils in Sri Lanka. Arundhati Roy, incidentally, has spent a lot of efforts advocating against the persecution of Tamils in Sri Lanka, drawing a lot of urgent attention to the situation. She had even described the persecution as having been on the verge of becoming genocidal. She has acknowledged the violence of this Tamil militant organization in Sri Lanka that also, incidentally, was responsible for the assassination of Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. But in Roy's view, it was the decades of persecutions of Tamils in Sri Lanka that had stirred the pot for the violence of this Tamil militant group to emerge in the first place. Again, I'm not in any way an expert on this history. I just wanted to do my best to provide context for this portion. But here Roy's really referring to the fact that deterrence assumes that your enemy, whom you hope to discourage from provoking you with this back pocket nuclear weapon you've got, is as afraid of annihilation as you are. But maybe they're not. Maybe you're up against a militant group that's prepared to die to fight you. And it's also bringing up some irony here, because a nation that's willing to develop nuclear weapons is itself, on some level, conceding that it's willing to self-annihilate to annihilate another. In any case, who's the you and who's the enemy? Both are only governments. Governments change. They wear masks within masks. They moat and reinvent themselves all the time. The one we have at the moment, for instance, does not even have enough seats to last a full term in office, but demands that we trust it to do pirouettes and party tricks with nuclear bombs, even as it scrabbles around for a foothold to maintain a simple majority in parliament. And this is the irony that Roy will bring out, that the development of the nuclear weapon was a project that the Indian government envisioned it for itself in order to position itself as a country that was on par with other developed nations that had developed the bomb. But the reality underneath that is very grim. It's a country with lots of extreme poverty, struggling with literacy rates, hunger, etc. And the very government trying to show its prowess through the development of this bomb was actually struggling to maintain a simple majority in parliament and struggling to solve a lot of these much bigger problems in their society. Flaw number two is that deterrence is premised on fear, but fear is premised on knowledge, on an understanding of the true extent and scale of the devastation that nuclear war will wreak. It is not some inherent mystical attribute of nuclear bombs that they automatically inspire thoughts of peace. On the contrary, it is an endless, tireless, confrontational work of people who have the courage to openly denounce them. The marches, the demonstrations, the films, the outrage, that is what averted, or perhaps only postponed nuclear war. Deterrence will not and cannot work given the levels of ignorance and illiteracy that hang over two countries like dense, impenetrable veils. That is a fascinating and really important point from Roy. The government is insisting that nuclear weapons program is protective, is a deterrence measure that will never get to the point of nuclear war. That the last time the world was on the brink of nuclear war, it ultimately didn't happen. So activists against this nuclear program are merely paranoid. But Roy points out that it's actually only because of those supposedly paranoid activists all around the world that widespread knowledge and awareness of the dangers of the bomb were possible, and that nuclear war has thus far been avoided. India and Pakistan have nuclear bombs now and feel entirely justified in having them. Soon others will too. Israel, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Norway, Nepal. I'm trying to be eclectic here. Denmark, Germany, Bhutan, Mexico, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, Burma, Bosnia, Singapore, North Korea, Sweden, South Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan. And why not? Every country in the world has a special case to make. Every country has borders and beliefs. This is another important point. Every country in the world has their own unique reasons for why they think it's so important for them to have nuclear weapons. Even if your only reason is that everyone else has them, and so now you need one too, to be level with everyone else. And when all our larders are bursting with shiny bombs and our bellies are empty, deterrence is an exorbitant beast. We can trade bombs for food, and when nuclear technology goes on the market, when it gets truly competitive and prices fall, not just governments, but anybody who can afford it, can have their own private arsenal. Businessmen, terrorists, perhaps even the occasional rich writer, like me. Our planet will bristle with beautiful missiles. There will be a new world order, the dictatorship of the pro nuclear elite. So, if any nation can make claims for why it needs nuclear weapons, soon wealthy and powerful individuals will make claims for why they need their own. Again, if only because everyone else has one. But let us pause to give credit where it's due. Who must we thank for all this? The men who made it happen, the masters of the universe. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America, come on up here, folks. Stand up and take a bow. Thank you for doing this to the world. Thank you for making a difference. Thank you for showing us the way. Thank you for altering the very meaning of life. From now on, it is not dying we must fear, but living. Altering the very meaning of life is interesting to me. Uh, I mean, in some ways, life has meaning only because of death. And now, by creating the very embodiment of death and destruction itself, you've altered the meaning of life altogether. All I can say to every man, woman, and sentient child in India, and over there just a little way in Pakistan, is take it personally. Whoever you are, Hindu, Muslim, urban, agrarian, it doesn't matter. The only good thing about nuclear war is that it is the single most egalitarian idea that man has ever had. On the day of reckoning, you will not be asked to present your credentials. The devastation will be indiscriminate. The bomb isn't in your backyard, it's in your body and mine. Nobody, no nation, no government, no man, no God has the right to put it there. We're radioactive already, and the war hasn't even begun, so stand up and say something. Never mind if it's been said before. Speak up on your own behalf. Take it very personally. And again, this is what I really like about this essay, how personal she makes this issue, because it is personal for everyone. And that brings us to the next portion of this essay, the bomb and I. And I think you're really going to like the way she connects the collective with the individual here. In early May, before the bomb, I left home for 3 weeks. I thought I would return. I had every intention of returning. Of course, things haven't worked out quite the way I had planned. While I was away, I met a friend whom I have always loved for, among other things, her ability to combine deep affection with a frankness that borders on savagery. I've been thinking about you, she said, about the God of small things. What's in it? What's over it? Under it? Around it? Above it? She fell silent for a while. I was uneasy and not at all sure that I wanted to hear the rest of what she had to say. She, however, was sure that she was going to say it. In this last year, less than a year actually, you've had too much of everything: fame, money, prizes, adulation, criticism, condemnation, ridicule, love, hate, anger, envy, generosity, everything. In some ways, it's a perfect story, perfectly baroque in its excess. The trouble is that it has, or can have, only one perfect ending. Her eyes were on me, bright and slanting, probing brilliance. She knew that I knew what she was going to say. She was insane. She was going to say that nothing that happened to me in the future could ever match the buzz of this, that the whole rest of my life was going to be vaguely unsatisfying, and therefore the only perfect ending to the story would be death. My death. The thought had occurred to me too. Of course it had. The fact that all this global dazzle, these lights in my eyes, the applause, the flowers, the photographers, the journalists feigning a deep interest in my life, yet struggling to get even a single fact straight, the men in suits fawning over me, the shiny hotel bathrooms with endless showers. None of it was likely to happen again. Would I miss it? Had I grown to need it? Was I a fame junkie? Would I have withdrawal symptoms? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became to me that if fame was going to be my permanent condition, it would kill me, club me to death with its good manners and hygiene. I'll admit that I've enjoyed my own 5 minutes of it immensely, but primarily because it was just 5 minutes. Because I knew, or thought I knew, that I could go home when I was bored and giggle about it, grow old and irresponsible, eat mangoes in the moonlight, maybe write a couple of failed books, worse sellers, to see what it felt like. For a whole year, I've cartwheeled across the world, anchored always to thoughts of home and the life I would go back to. I love this because so many of us are sitting here wanting fame and fortune and power, and yet there's so many people who have those things, enjoying them for 5 minutes, and then longing to come back home. Or in this case, what Roy thought was her home. Contrary to all the inquiries and predictions about my impending emigration, that was the well I dipped into. That was my sustenance, my strength. I told my friend there was no such thing as a perfect story. I said that in any case, hers was an external view of things. This assumption that the trajectory of a person's happiness, or let's say fulfillment, had peaked, and now must trough, because she had accidentally stumbled upon success. It was premised on the unimaginative belief that wealth and fame were the mandatory stuff of everybody's dreams. You've lived too long in New York, I told her. There are other worlds, other kinds of dreams, dreams in which failure is feasible, honorable, sometimes even worth striving for. Worlds in which recognition is not the only barometer of brilliance or human worth. There are plenty of warriors I know and love, people far more valuable than myself, who go to war each day knowing in advance they will fail. True, they are less successful, in the most vulgar sense of the word, but they are by no means less fulfilled. The only dream worth having, I told her, is to dream that you will live while you're alive and die only when you're dead. Prescience, perhaps? Which means what exactly? Arched eyebrows, a little annoyed. I tried to explain, but I didn't do a very good job of it. Sometimes I need to write, to think. So I wrote it down for her on a paper napkin. This is what I wrote: to love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and vulgar disparity of life around you, to seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its lair, to never simplify what's complicated, or complicate what's simple, to respect strength, never power. Above all, to watch, to try and understand, to never look away, and never, never to forget. This is probably the most beautiful passage of the whole essay, and probably the crux of the whole essay. It's about this nuclear weapons program, but it's about so much more. It's about the things worth living and dying for in life. So if there's any part of this essay that you take away, it's this part of the passage. I've known her for many years as a friend of mine. She's an architect too. She looked dubious, somewhat unconvinced by my paper napkin speech. I could tell that structurally, just in terms of the sleek narrative symmetry of things, and because she loves me, her thrill at my success was so keen, so generous, that it weighed in evenly with her anticipated horror at the idea of my death. I understood that it was nothing personal, just a design thing. Anyhow, 2 weeks after that conversation, I returned to India, to what I think slash thought of as my home. Something had died, but it wasn't me. It was infinitely more precious. It was a world that has been ailing for a while, that has finally breathed its last breath. It's been cremated now. The air is thick with ugliness, and there's the unmistakable stench of fascism on the breeze. Day after day in the newspaper editorials, on the radio, on TV chat shows, on MTV for heaven's sake, people whose instincts one thought one could trust, writers, painters, journalists, make the crossing. The chill seeps into my bones as it becomes painfully apparent from the lessons of everyday life that what you read in history books is true. That fascism is indeed as much about people as about governments. That it begins at home, in drawing rooms, in bedrooms, in beds, explosion of self esteem, road to resurgence, a moment of pride. These were the headlines in the papers in the days following the nuclear tests. We have proved that we are not eunuchs anymore, said Mr. Thackeray of the Shiv Sena. Whoever said we were? True, a good number of us are women, but that, as far as I know, isn't the same thing. Reading the papers, it's often hard to tell whether people were referring to Viagra, which was competing for second place on the front pages, and when they were talking about the bomb. We have superior strength and potency. This was our Minister for Defense after Pakistan completed its tests. I really like this. Roy was never living under the illusion that Indians were eunuchs. And yet, in making this statement, Mr. Thackeray is revealing the feelings of insufficiency that led the Indian government to need this bomb to prove their potency and strength in the first place. She also asserts that being a woman is very different from simply being a man without manly power, that women have their own kind of strength and power. Later, she'll note that, unlike Mr. Thackeray, she has nothing against eunuchs either. By drawing the connection to Viagra, she points to how individual this issue really is, the feelings of insecurity and insufficiency, the compensation for deeper problems in our lives with ostentation and external displays of strength. These are not just nuclear tests, they're nationalism tests, we were repeatedly told. This has been hammered home over and over again. The bomb is India. India is the bomb. Not just India, Hindu India. Therefore, be warned. Any criticism of it is not just anti national, but anti Hindu. Of course, in Pakistan, the bomb is Islamic. Other than that, politically, the same physics applies. This is an important point. In America, the bomb is American. In India, it's Hindu. In Pakistan, it's Islamic. But really, the bomb is the same bomb everywhere. Equally destructive, equally indiscriminate, and egalitarian in its destructiveness. This is one of the unexpected perks of having a nuclear bomb. Not only can the government use it to threaten the enemy, they can use it to declare war on their own people, us. When I told my friends I was writing this piece, they cautioned me. Go ahead, they said, but first make sure you're not vulnerable. Make sure your papers are in order. Make sure your taxes are paid. Another important point that the bomb is not simply used by governments to threaten other governments, but to threaten one's own dissenting citizens, people like Arundhati Roy. The next few paragraphs are great as well, and they're basically devoted to untangling the bomb from Indianness. Support from India at the time meant support for the bomb. And Roy will untangle these two, as well as many bizarre arguments that the Indian government made for why it was so important and timely to produce this bomb. But I'm going to skip these as they focus a bit more on the intricacies. I want to take us to the end, which brings us back to the more universal themes. India's nuclear bomb is the final act of betrayal by a ruling class that has failed its people. However many garlands we heap on our scientists, however many medals we pin to their chests, the truth is that it's far easier to make a bomb than to educate 400 million people. According to opinion polls, we're expected to believe there's a national consensus on the issue. It's official now. Everyone loves a bomb. Therefore, the bomb is good. This really brings us to the crux of the essay. to respect strength rather than power. The bomb is power, but the hard work of uplifting 400 million struggling, suffering people, that is strength. And that's something much more challenging and respectable. She's also bringing up the fallacious assumption here that just because polling is positive for an issue means that it's good. And she's going to move on to the question of the validity of these polls themselves and whether the respondents have truly received the proper information to respond in their own best interests. Is it possible for a man who cannot write his own name to understand even the basic elementary facts about the nature of nuclear weapons? Has anybody told him that nuclear war has nothing at all to do with his received notions of war, nothing to do with honor, nothing to do with pride? Another reminder that nuclear war is something very different from any war we've ever experienced or can imagine. It is the end of imagination itself. Has anybody bothered to explain to him about thermal blasts, radioactive fallout, and the nuclear winter? Are there even words in his language to describe the concepts of enriched uranium, fissile material, and critical mass? Or has his language itself become obsolete? Is he trapped in a time capsule, watching the world pass him by, unable to understand or communicate with it because his language never took into account the horrors that the human race would dream up? Does he not matter at all, this man? His language is obsolete. The ancient and rich languages of India cannot even accommodate something as disastrous as nuclear war, and the invention of the bomb has now rendered those languages obsolete, rendered those richer, more imaginative worlds obsolete. Those that speak those languages are now trapped in time capsules, watching a world they can no longer communicate with pass them by. I'm not talking about one man, of course. I'm talking about millions and millions of people who live in this country. This is their land too, you know. They have the right to make an informed decision about its fate, and as far as I can tell, nobody has informed them about anything. The tragedy is that nobody could, even if they wanted to. Truly, literally, there's no language to do it in. This is the real horror of India. The orbits of the powerful and the powerless spinning further and further apart from each other, never intersecting, sharing nothing, not a language, not even a country. The powerful and the powerless, not even really sharing a country, living in different countries altogether, different languages. Who the heck conducted these opinion polls? Who is the prime minister to decide whose finger will be on the nuclear button that could turn everything we love, our earth, our skies, our mountains, our plains, our rivers, our cities, and villages, to ash in an instant? Who is he to reassure us that there will be no accidents? How does he know? Why should we trust him? What has he ever done to make us trust him? What have any of them ever done to make us trust them? The nuclear bomb is the most anti-democratic, anti-national, anti-human, outright evil thing that man has ever made. If you're religious, then remember, this bomb is man's challenge to God. It's worded quite simply. We have the power to destroy everything that you have created. If you're not religious, then look at it this way. This world of ours is 4,600,000,000 years old. It could end in an afternoon. I hope this essay moved you the way it moved me. As you can see, it's about so much more than India and so much more than nuclear weapons. It's about what makes us human and what doesn't.